Hello everyone, I'm MVL and welcome to my 2022 Game Room Tour. I have a ton of different video game consoles and systems, handhelds, etc. and around 2,000 plus games in this game room which I'm going to show you in this video. This is going to be a ton of fun and I'm excited to give you a tour of my game room. I'm going to start off by showing the consoles and computers and things like that. Then we're going to take a look at the video games, which I'm going to go in order of loose cartridges and then boxed games in the order that they are on the shelves themselves. I have elected not to have the screens, the televisions on and the monitors for this video because most of the time they're not on anyway, so I wanted this to be representative of how the game room normally is. I like to organize my stuff very well so that I can find everything, so everything is in its own section. You know, the cartridges are in a cartridge section if they're loose, and the boxed games are in their own section. Everything's alphabetical, otherwise I wouldn't be able to find anything when you're dealing with a lot of games. It will be hard to find stuff when you actually want to find it if they're all in random order, for example. And also, to put my collection into perspective, there are collectors out there that have as many games as I have total in just PlayStation 4 games. PS Commander comes to mind for that. So this is going to be a lot of fun showing you my own collection. We're going to start with the consoles first. And we're going to start off right here with some of the older systems and some of the newer systems to play older games on this shelving section right here. As you can see, there's a lot of Nintendo systems and a couple of Sega systems on the shelf. And then it moves on to where my CRT TVs are, and some other consoles are there as well, and also my flat screen TV with some of the more modern systems. I don't have the current generation systems like the PlayStation number 5 and the Xbox naming convention. You have the Vectrix there, my current PC, and a couple of older computer systems there like the Commodore Amiga and the Commodore 64, on top of some laptops which I used to play older PC games and PC programs like that as well. The Amiga 500 there, one of my favorite systems of all time, as is the Commodore 64. Love that system. I have a number of cassette games in my game collection that I will show in this video as well. We're going to start off here with the Sega CD here, as we call it over here in the UK, the Mega CD. Next to that we have the Mega Drive Model 1. This has been modded by Scodico Retro, so it is region free, or it has a region select on it I should say. And this is the Retro Freak system I use to emulate a lot of systems if I don't have the capability to do them normally, and it also really helps out for streaming. There's the Master System there, and there's the Evercade VS or Versus, a newer system to play retro games from cartridges, fully licensed. And there's the Nintendo Entertainment System. I modded that myself to be a front loader. Here we have the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, another fantastic system, one of my favorites alongside the Mega Drive. Absolutely love their system. Here's another great system, the Nintendo 64, also modded by Scodico Retro. That has enhanced capabilities on that. There is the Nintendo GameCube there, which has the Game Boy player attachment on it, so we can play Game Boy, Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advanced games, and that's my preferred way to do that, playing them on the big screen. We have a couple of Wiis there. One is an American Wii that I modded so that it could play Japanese games, and the other one is European. There's the Nintendo Switch there, and there's the Atari 2600, another great system that I really enjoy. There's some of my screens there. Like I mentioned, they are not turned on for this video. And two CRT TVs there. One is a Philips and one is a Sony Trinitron. And then there's a Panasonic flat screen. There's the Wii U, great system. PlayStation 2 there. I play my PlayStation 1 games on my PlayStation 2. I also want to highlight the cable here. This is the RAD2X from Retro Gaming Cables, using the RetroTink technology. And that's how I normally stream that system. Although I do have RGB SCART cables for when I use my CRTs. There's a Sega Saturn and PlayStation number 3 there. There's the Dreamcast and the PlayStation number 4 tucked away down the bottom there as well, with an hard drive because everything needs to be on the hard drive for those systems. Here's my PAL TurboGrafx 16, which forces all of the games played on it to be played at 50Hz, so they do run slower. And here is a relatively new addition to the game room, a Core Graphics modded by Scorco Retro. And I do use an EverDrive on this because it otherwise wouldn't be able to play American games, and that can play them with that EverDrive, which is fantastic. Here's my Panasonic 3DO, a real system, and beneath that is my Philips CDI. Really like these systems and I enjoy some of the oddities. Here's my flat screen TV here, which has an original Xbox below that, and below that is an Xbox 360. My previous Xbox 360 red ringed, which means it stopped working because modern systems tend to have less of a lifespan than older systems. Like my NES, for example, has been working for about as long as I've been alive, but my Xbox 360 only lasted about 4 years. Below that I also had an Xbox One, and there was my PC, which I used for streaming and stuff like that. Here's a bunch of kind of mini systems or plug and play systems next to some Sony speakers and another Xbox 360, a Gears of War model. Of the plug and play systems here, we have a Capcom plug and play, a Namco one, and a Space Invaders one, and a Mega Drive style plug and play there. Here's a bunch of the mini systems like the Mega Drive Model 1, 2, the TurboGrafx Mini, the NES Mini, some Game & Watch Minis, Super Nintendo Mini is back there as well, and a bunch of controllers for these systems. Below that we have the Commodore 64 Mini, and the Astro City Mini, and a Neo Geo Mini there as well. Over here we have my Vectrix, which is a vector-based system, next to my PC monitor, which is deliberately small so you can see my older flat screen over that. And here's a bunch of the scaling devices I use. That HD video converter is just for the PlayStation 3. Then we have some Rad2Xs from Retro Gaming Cables. One of those is for Nintendo systems. And then we have my Retro Tinks. We have the SCART and the 2X Pro multi-format. Now we're going to take a look at my handhelds. I forgot to include my regular Game Boy Advance and my Pro 200, but there's the Game Boy Advance SP and the DS and the 3DS there as well, Pokemon version. Here's my Final Fantasy VII Anniversary PlayStation Portable. Love that system. I have a cable to play that on the TV as well. And here is my Evercade limited edition black version, which is the first model they put out. And I also have another limited edition Evercade, which is the purple version, which is in this Switch case because that's the case I had spare for it. And this one looks really nice as well. They have recently released a newer handheld, but I'm very happy with the ones I have. This is a great system with its own cartridge-based games you'll see later in this video. Now, speaking of cartridges, we're going to take a look at the loose cartridges here, which live in this corner of the game room. Now, I also have boxed games, but they're in a different section of the game room, so you'll see that in just a little bit. But for now, we'll take a look at the loose cartridges, organized best I can, given that they are different systems and different regions here, and many of these cartridges do not have end labels, which makes it a little bit more tricky. Here's some American games. I have D-Force and Super Mario Kart, and some Japanese games I also have as well in my collection. Here are my NES games. The majority of these games, I will say, are PAL versions, so keep that in mind. They are for my PAL consoles because I live in the UK. These are the games that are available to me. It's not super practical to import an entire game collection for overseas, even if those versions may run a little better. So I really enjoy the Nintendo Entertainment System. It wasn't as popular over here as it was in America, but it's still an awesome system to collect for, and we got a lot of games for it over here as we did the Super Nintendo. Now, for the Super Nintendo, we missed out a lot of games in the UK, Super Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger, the Final Fantasy games on the Super Nintendo as well, Earthbound, a lot of games that were really good. But until Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation 1, RPGs were not localized as much over here in the UK for the most part. Those big name games that you would expect over in America didn't make it over here. As you can see, what else didn't make it over here is end labels for our Super Nintendo cartridges, which is more than a little awkward when you're trying to organize a collection. I've seen people print off their own end labels and attach them to Nintendo 64 cartridges, so something like that might be possible for Super Nintendo games as well, and that would be pretty cool. Over here you're seeing some more of my loose cartridges. There's a box for the Game Boy player, some Famicom games over there, and a Super Famicom game in Street Fighter 2, and isolated there a Mario game for the 2600. Here are my Nintendo 64 games, which as loose cartridges are a little bit unwieldy because of their shape and the fact that they don't have end labels, but it's still a really awesome system to collect for as well. Super Game Boy box there. Here are my loose Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and Game Boy Advanced games as well. And I also have some card-shaped games there as well. Below that we have some Sega games with the Master System, Game Gear, and Mega Drive. And below that we have most of my 2600 games as well. And a couple of oddities there as well, which we'll have a look into as we go on. So for Game Boy games, again, they're a little bit awkward when they are loose cartridges to organize, but they are alphabetized. And in some instances I put certain cartridges next to each other, like the Pokemon games, because they are colored differently. It's kind of interesting to have them isolated like that. We also have the Game Boy Advance games there, and the Game Boy Color games you saw separately, which were the transparent cartridges. And here we have some TurboGrafx games. I also have some PC Engine games there, and some Sega card games there as well, like Teddy Boy. Below that we have my Master System games, which also do not have end labels, despite the fact that the sticker goes around to the top. There's no end labels, which is very strange. Here's the Game Gear games, also no end labels, of course, for the Sega Game Gear. I actually only play those on the Retro Freak with an attachment, and I play them on the TV that way. Here's some Mega Drive games over here, and here is a Game Genie, and here's Berserk for the Vectrex. Now I don't believe this cartridge works, either that or the cartridge slot on my Vectrex does not work, unfortunately. I have a couple of Miss Pac-Man games here. Miss Pac-Man is an awesome game. I would say better than Pac-Man. It's one of the instances like Alien and Aliens, the film franchise, where a lot of people might think the second film is better than the first. I think that for Pac-Man, to be fair, because the first Pac-Man game was not as good as the arcade game on the 2600. It was really great, but Miss Pac-Man was, in my view, better. So now we're going to take a look at the boxed games. We're going to start off from left to right here, and we're just going to take a look at them as they come around. And I tried to assemble this in order of oldest to most modern, but I also had to take into account the sizing of the shelf. So as you can see, the most leftover space here is in this CD size shelving area. Now I used to keep PC games here at one point, but now I just keep oddities to the left here, and then Game Boy and DS stuff, and then PlayStation stuff to the right of that, and I keep my PC stuff elsewhere. I will say also that I do have a Philips personal monitor for my Commodore systems that I use where I normally keep my PC stuff. But you're going to see some oddities here. So these are things like HuCard games for the TurboGrafx or PC Engine, in this case PC Engine, and we have CDI games here. Again, not a vast amount of these because there weren't actually that many of these actually. Probably one of the easiest complete collections to get, maybe something like that or the Virtual Boy. And then we have 3DO games here as well in their CD style cases. And I don't really have anywhere to, let's say, put these, so I just put them on this small shelving unit here to keep them all together. And Theme Park is a great game. Here we have my Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and DS and 3DS stuff here. There's a bunch of controllers on the top there and zappers. I'm a big fan of zappers. That's why I like having a CRT TV. We're going to take a look at the Game Boy games first. Now, I don't know if it's just a PAL region thing, but a lot of Game Boy games don't have the name of the game on the spine or the side of the box. Either which way, some of them might have the name on the top flap of the box, but you can't see the name on some of the any size of the box on some games, so it's really hard to organize Game Boy games in the box. Maybe I should put them in box protectors and then print the name on the side with a sticker. It's something I've been thinking about doing. Also, cardboard boxes are very easily destroyed. I know that I tore up a lot of the cardboard boxes for games like Pokemon, which were very common back in the day, but now demand a crazy price. So there's something I might want to put in box protectors to protect anyway. Van Helsing there is a terrible reproduction. I did a video on that. It is incredibly funny. The manual of that reproduction is actually a Sonic manual, which is lunacy, and it's terrific, and that's why I kept that. We have some DS games here. The DS cases are nice and sturdy. They're a little bit different from the American style cases, which are a little bit thinner, and I know they have a space in them for Game Boy Advance games, so a lot of people do use those as cases for loose Game Boy Advance games, which is kind of cool. Here we have 3DS games here. Certain DS and 3DS games are becoming more sought after and more expensive, so that's definitely something I would keep an eye on. Now let's take a look at the PlayStation 1 games, and I do love PlayStation games, but one thing I do not love is the PAL cases for PlayStation games. They are quite brittle and they're easy to break, and one thing you will notice here in this video is the glass or the reflective cases are very reflective to light, and they're kind of difficult to film at particular angles, so you're going to see a little bit of shine and a little bit of reflection from the light in my game room, as I have a lot of light so that I can film in a good amount of light, and that is very reflective on these cases, and they're very awkward because of that. They're very awkward to film, and they are wider than your standard single CD cases. There are of course multi-cases for multi-disc games, but they are wider because the manuals in PAL games have more languages in than, let's say, the American games, which only need to have the English language in. So they're a little bit bigger than that, and you fit less of them on a shelf. I would prefer them to be thinner, like the American counterparts, which are just in, I believe, standard style CD cases for like one CD. These are quite thicker, these dual cases, and because of that, they do take up more space on the shelves. And this is also the case for things like Dreamcast as well. They also have these wider cases because of the manuals needing to be bigger for more languages. And that is cool, but I would have preferred them to be smaller just so they take up less space on the shelf. And of course, like I mentioned, these cases are quite easy to break, and they're quite difficult to find replacements for these days because it is a very unique design for these cases, and they're very shiny, as you can see as well. Resident Evil 2 there, Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil Survivor, a great game. The PAL version of that game you can use a zapper for, and I believe in the American version you cannot, and you have to use the right kind of zapper as well, I will say. I think it uses the Konami Justifier style zapper. I loved that game when it came out. It's a short game, but it's a lot of fun, as a lot of zapper games are, and I really like that style of gameplay, which is why I do keep some tube TVs on hand to enjoy that type of gaming experience. And the PlayStation was a fantastic system, and I mostly play my PlayStation 1 games on the PlayStation number 2, and I have the larger PlayStation number 2 because I have had a slim PlayStation 2 in the past, and that has scratched discs, which has been a most unfortunate experience because some of these PlayStation games and some PlayStation 2 games are also quite sought after these days, so replacing them is rather awkward. I have thought about maybe looking into a optical drive replacement. I've seen people use SD cards with systems like the PlayStation 2 to play the games off that, and that might be something I look into, as the discs themselves do have a lifespan, less so than cartridges, so that is something I will need to look into in the future, definitely. Anyway, some Sega stuff here. We have Sega CD, we have Sega Saturn, and below that we have some Sega Dreamcast. The Dreamcast cases, like I mentioned, also dual style cases, also quite big. Shenmue there is one of the stranger packages. It's just two singular cases put together in a cardboard insert. Very strange because it looks like two individual games outside of the cardboard insert. Sega Mega Drive here, and of course above that we have Master System. I absolutely love the Sega Mega Drive. I love having these games in box. They are a little bit dearer and a little bit harder to find in the box, but when I can find them in the box, that's definitely what I go for. Then we have some Evercade games there as well, and then a couple of oddities below that as well. But we'll start off with the Master System. Now, some of these games have got pretty expensive these days. Golden Axe Warrior is shockingly expensive, and I was fortunate enough to get a lot of these games when they were cheaper, but definitely the Sega games are becoming more and more sought after. But I will say, a lot of games you can get in collections for modern systems, and on online services, if that is the type of thing you're into, you can get the Switch Online experience and play these games there fully licensed as well. But I would recommend maybe the Sega Minis that they've brought out have a large amount of games on them, and they have an accurate controller, which is a great way to experience these kind of games if you want to do that on the cheap. And also they release lots of collections for the PlayStation number 3, PlayStation number 4, and so on, with a lot of games on them as well. So that's a great way to try these out as well. I have a new Mega Drive game there with Metal Dragon from Kai Magazine Software. Fantastic game. That's very cool, and that's a new release, so I really like that systems from the time gone by are getting new games made for them. That's very cool. And that Metal Dragon is a fantastic game as well, so I recommend checking that out. Now we're going to take a look at, speaking of new, some of the Evercade games. One of these is sealed, the Gremlin Collection, and I had planned to do an unboxing of that, but I think I'll just open it anyway. These are fantastic, and they play on both your handheld and your console, the VS or the Versus system, with the exception of the two Namco collections at this time of recording. Here we have some 3DO games, including Sewer Shark, Pretend It's a Game, and you have some dust covers for NES games there. Speaking of NES, here's the NES, boxed NES that is, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and then we have GameCube, Wii, Wii U, and eventually, down the bottom here, we also have the newest Nintendo newest Nintendo system, the Switch. It's easy to say, but somehow I botched it. So, we're going to start off by looking at the NES here. I have a Famicom boxed game there as well, and then we have some Super Nintendo games. You may wonder what these box protectors are. They are box protectors from My Game Vault, and that is a UK company. It's easier for me to get them from the UK than it is to get them shipped overseas, and those are really good. I don't have them for every game at the moment, and I did a review video for them actually at one point, and I would like to have them for every game. At the moment I just have them sort of randomly on random games whenever I have picked up these box protectors, but they're really great. For example, the Xena game there, the box is completely ruined, and having it in the box protector really keeps it together and makes it look more presentable. Here's the GameCube games here. I have Donkey Konga there. I actually have the bongos for that as well, which I have in the box elsewhere in the game room. And we have the Wii here. Now I mostly play my Wii games on the Wii U. I actually mostly play my GameCube games on the GameCube. You would have thought I might play them on the Wii, but it is because I have that Rad 2X from Retro Gaming Cables that I can have great quality from a PAL Nintendo GameCube playing from RGB, so that looks fantastic. American GameCubes I believe do S-video. So for PAL GameCube, the Retro Gaming Cable solution is very, very good. We also have Wii U games here as well. Wii U is a fantastic, underrated system. The only thing I don't quite like about it is the actual controller itself, to be fair. It's very big, but I do really love the Wii U. And I also really love the Switch. It's a system I'll be getting more and more into. Of the modern systems, it's probably my favourite. It's partially due to the aesthetic of it. The cartridges being so small is really good. I like the cartridges as well. Because they're cartridges, unlike the Blu-ray discs of modern systems, you don't have to install them onto the system, so you don't have to wait ages for your games to be playable like you do on modern systems like the PlayStation number 4, number 5, and the Xbox Alphabet and so on. And also the cases are really small as well. I really like that. They don't take up much room on your game shelf, and that's something with a larger collection, I really do appreciate. PlayStation 2 now, I have a lot of PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 was an incredibly popular system over here in Europe, so there's a lot of PS2 games out there, and it's a system that's really cheap. And if you're looking for my advice on a good place to start a collection, at least in the PAL region, PlayStation 2 is going to be your go-to. I have most of the PlayStation 2 games I would want to seek out that I can find easily, aside from extremely rare and hard to find games or expensive games or what have you. And of course, a lot of my game room has been used up space-wise, and a lot of that is PlayStation 2 because it's so cheap. So it is quite easy to start a sizable retro gaming collection, depending on where you consider retro gaming being from or to, but PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, over here in the PAL region, very accessible. You do have to deal with these awful PAL PlayStation 2 cases, where all of the spines are black and white, and it really doesn't have much personality. I do remember someone commenting that they thought that these were barcodes to me, like product barcodes in a shop, for example, when they saw these, and I thought that was quite funny. But yes, the American versions of PlayStation 2 games actually have more decorated spines than we have over here in the PAL region for whatever reason. I'm not sure why they went with this look. It's not very eye-catching en masse, but I guess it is easy to read. So that's one thing about it. And speaking of easy to read, naturally I have these in alphabetical order so you can see everything as you move along. I know people like to categorize their collections in different ways. I can certainly see a merit to putting your collection in, let's say, all games from one series together, because sometimes games have different names all over the alphabetical space if they're in the same game series. I can see putting those together, but I'm not sure I would go the DVD route, if you will. Some people, for collections of videos, for example, they like to put them in their genres. I'm not sure I would do that for games, but I do put them in different systems. So we're moving on to PlayStation 3 and PlayStation number 4 and the PlayStation Portable here as well. I really like the PlayStation Portable. My preferred way to play it is on the TV, and I have a cable to do that with. PlayStation Portable 2000 and 3000 models, so Slim and Light and 3000, have the capability through component cable attachment to play on your television. So I recommend that. And also I will mention about my flat screen TV. I have an older flat screen TV, and because of that it supports lower resolutions. Your newer screens, like your 4K screens, which I don't exactly need for the games that I play, they may not support your lower resolutions like 240 or 480, or in the PAL region 288 or 576. So keep that in mind when you're using screens, and if you're using, let's say, line doublers, you're going to want a screen that is capable of doing that. And for these more modern games like the PlayStation number 4, you're going to want like stuff that can do 1080. So it's one thing that is not often said, but your viewing experience, especially on flat screens, is going to be determined by what the screen is capable of for its resolutions that it can handle. The reason scalers are important for a lot of systems is when the television itself might blow something up to the right size or not even support it and show anything, you're going to get a worse experience. Anyway, speaking of PSP games, I really like the PlayStation Portable. A lot of unique games for it. They supported the system very well. I do have a couple of Vita games, but the Vita didn't quite get the love it deserved, I feel. I have a PlayStation TV, which is like a Vita that only plays on the TV, but it doesn't play everything. So that's why I haven't dived into Vita games as much as I have other systems, and the Vita is a bit more modern as well. Original Xbox games here. I have a good amount of these. I love the original Xbox. It's a system I've grown more appreciation for the more time has gone on. Initially, I was a bit reluctant because Xbox's association of Microsoft and it being a PC system. I don't normally game on PC as much as I do console because of the plug and play experience of consoles. Maybe not nowadays with the newer systems, which take a long time to install, almost as long as a Commodore 64 cassette might take to load to the RAM of a Commodore 64, which used to take quite a while back in the day. It's almost an instant experience with a lot of these older systems, and even though you might not get the same visual experience as you would on a PC, I like the instant nature of that. And I've always found PCs to be a bit temperamental when they like to update, or things don't work because, let's say, you have a printer driver that is interfering with how the game wants to run. And just a lot of things, in my experience, from older PC games, admittedly back in the day, tend to not work so well or glitch, so it gets frustrating. So I like to play not PC games, sorry, I've mixed up myself, confused myself. I like to play console games because for the most part they are designed to work, and if they don't work, they didn't sell in the first place. So a couple of figures here, a couple of amiibos, you'll see a bit more of that. There was a Blood Rain figure there. I recently did a Blood Rain review as a Halloween special, so you can check that out. Onto Xbox 360 here. More of the modern era, if you will. I was really into the 360 because my friends were really into the 360 at the time, and I sort of slept on the PlayStation 3, which is another system I'm growing more appreciation for. Even though the PlayStation 3 now, I think they have added some sort of two-step authentication to log in, so I'm a bit wary of that system. It seems like Sony is trying to stop people using the PlayStation 3, and they just want you to use the PlayStation number 5 and its online service. Xbox is doing a similar thing, I think, with the Xbox Game Pass, but the reason I have an Xbox One, which is the third Xbox on the later generation, like the 4th generation, that's confusing in of itself actually, is that you can play a lot of original Xbox games and some Xbox 360 games in enhanced modes, which is really good for streaming on your Xbox One, so I really like that system for that, and that's why I don't have that many Xbox One games. I tend to have the exclusives, and I actually use my Xbox One mostly for the odd game like Morrowind, for example, which plays a lot better on the Xbox One than it did on the original Xbox when it came out. But anyway, I do have a lot of Xbox 360 games. My friends were really into that at the time. It was a good multiplayer system. Played a lot of Halo, like we did on the N64 when we played a lot of Perfect Dark or GoldenEye or Mario Kart. I still lean towards the Mario Kart, of course, but Halo was a lot of fun multiplayer. And there's the odd splatter of Xbox One games. A couple of great exclusives in there. It's like Sunset Overdrive, for example, which is very cheap to pick up individually on the disc copy for the Xbox One. And finally, we're going to take a look at some of the PC games here, and some action figures as well, which I've recently put on display. I have a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stuff as well, which you won't see in this video, but that's in another area. But I have a lot of D&D stuff as well, which is not currently on display, but I have put my Star Wars stuff that I found on display. There's my Resident Evil 2 Collector's Edition. That's a big box, and I elected not to get the Resident Evil Remake 3 and upcoming 4 Collector's Edition because they're just too big. So I do have some Collector's Editions here, but I try to stay away from Collector's Editions because they take up too much space. I do like having stuff like soundtrack CDs and stuff, but they do take up a lot of space. Odd big box PC game here as well. So some Collector's Editions here, and if the Collector's Edition features the game in a regular style case, I will take the case out and put that on the shelf so I can easily get to it without opening up the Collector's Edition box, because some of these boxes are kind of intricate and it's a bit annoying to open them up, so I tend to take the game out and put that with the rest of the games, and then I have, let's say, if there's an art book or a CD, that's in the Collector's Edition case. Some PC games here, and by that there is some Commodore games and there's some Amiga games in various style of boxes. There are a couple of Atari 2600 box games here, some PC games here, Baldur's Gate, fantastic, Dungeon Keeper, Stephen King's F-13, which makes me shudder a little bit. Different size PC games there as well. Some Amiibos, some more PC games of various sizes, and we have some CD style PC games, and then we have some Commodore ZX Spectrum and stuff like that. Mostly dataset games at the bottom there in cassette cases. So looking at these games, some great games here. I do like the old packaging of PC games, especially when you come to like the big box. There's Resident Evil 2 on the Game.com handheld, or Gamecom handheld I should say. A lot of people don't know about that game, for good reason. Here's the Amiibos here. I have a couple of these, I've been getting into these, and I do like the Amiibos for display. I'm thinking about putting them on the end of the game shelves for the Nintendo section, just to brighten that up a little bit. But I have a good amount of these, and I am looking for more of them as well. I tend to grab stuff when I can find it, rather than order stuff online if I can help it, because that's more of a fun way for me to do it, and that's something I have the game hunting videos for as well. So some big box PC games here, and there's June for the Amiga, a couple of interesting Amiga games there. We also have some CD-style PC games here. Some of these were from big boxes, but I no longer have the big boxes. Unfortunately, a lot of those got broken up. Silver Mountain there is a Commodore game that you have to enter yourself. I think it is either for the VIC-20 or Commodore 64, I forget, but you have to enter all the code yourself. That's something you had to do back in the day. And we have some more Commodore games here. And then we have a splattering of Commodore and other systems like the BBC Micro and the ZX Spectrum. A lot of dataset games here, or you could say cassette-based games. These took a long time to run. This is one of the first systems I remember using, so I have a lot of fond memories of these systems. But these days I'm a little too afraid to use them because they have a high chance of breaking like videotapes. And there's a couple of power tapes there. You used to get tapes as like demo discs with magazines. You got free games with them, which was awesome. Used to love that. Not something that happens so much anymore. And here we have some DVD-style PC games leading on to some music that is video game related and some Star Wars action figures. Recently started doing Star Wars game hunting videos on the channel, so I hope you enjoy checking those out. So here's some DVD-style cased games for the PC. These are the most accessible and easiest to store games on the PC, and a lot of times you can find older games in collections like the Sold Out collection that have been updated for more modern versions of the Windows operating system, for example, and they're on, instead of let's say 1,000 floppy disks, they might be on a couple of CDs, or instead of on a bunch of CDs, they might be on a DVD, depending on the collection. And that's one way to get those games working a little bit easier. I have a couple of floppy disks here. I have a lot more floppy disks stored away, but that's a couple that I have to hand, a couple of Amiga games, for example. Here's some music CDs for various video games, stuff like the Smash Brothers collection and the Zelda music collection there, which came from magazines, and some of these came from special editions like the Streets of Rage soundtrack there came from a limited run collection of the game. And finally, here are some of my Star Wars figures that I started putting on display. I've really enjoyed diving back into this. It's something I've wanted to put back on display for a long time, but they've been locked away in storage, and finally I've decided to start taking these out. Now, I don't have every single Star Wars figure under the sun. My goodness, like video games, certainly I wish I grabbed everything when it was out. You never know what's going to become valuable, but I do enjoy the figures that I have, and certainly the characters I have figures for I'm very fond of. And I've kind of divided these into good guys, bad guys, and at the bottom here, neutral guys, or to the most part, there's the vehicle in the distance there, the AT-ST, and we have Jabba the Hutt there. And looking close here at some of the bounty hunters and the dancer characters, I actually have a backdrop to Jabba's palace, which was made of cardboard, which unfortunately got water damaged. A portion of my collection got water damaged a while back, which is unfortunate. A lot of my big box PC games went that way. But anyway, guys, there you have it. That is my video game room tour for 2022. Thank you for checking out this video, and thank you so much for your support. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I have been MVL, and I will catch you next time.